Hi, folks. The Trail of Tears was probably one of the most unfortunate, at least, I mean, that's even not a good word for it. It was a horrible time for the American Indian. The U.S. was determined. Ever since we became a nation, we believe we own the continent. Manifest destiny was the dominant belief that took everybody. All the Americans that wanted to go west had that in their soul. They believed that God had ordained that we conquer the continent, and that's what we determined to do. And that meant fighting our way across the land. And that also meant major difficulties with some Indians, not all. There were some Indians that we got along with, but there were some of them that we didn't get along with. You understand, so many of the Indians were very nomadic. They moved from place to place. Their main occupation was hunting. That's how they survived. And we know that the buffalo became a very prime target for many people moving west because it was a very good sale. The buffalo hides and everything got a lot of money back east. So you got a lot of hunters wanting to get that hide, and so there was a lot of killing of buffalo. And we wanted to get the meat too. The only problem was that the Indians needed that meat as well. That was their survival. But it didn't matter to a lot of people and the white folks. They just wanted to go out there and kill the beef, kill the animal, and take what they could of it. So there was that problem. And there was also a problem of land. We decided we wanted to take the land. The Indians said, wait a second, we were here first. And we ended up battling with them over it. In a lot of ways, it was a brutal struggle. At the same time, it was one of those things where if in order for Americans to move west, it was almost necessary. And we fought and we were able to take the territories. And in response to taking these territories, what we decided to do was put Indians on reservations. Now, that wasn't too pretty, but since we had the victory, we believed we could do it. And so we started putting them on reservations, basically to allow them to farm and to build their own villages, but still, they were limited to reservations. For some tribes, that didn't work, especially if they were hunters and roam nomadic. But for some tribes, farming was okay if they could get the right kind of soil. That was another thing. In some cases, they didn't get the right kind of soil. In some cases, the soil was actually pretty poor. So they suffered. There was even starvation in those areas because they had soil that wasn't willing to cooperate. In 1835, a law was passed, the Indian Restoration Act, which basically was a mechanism for forcing them off their land onto the reservations. It led to something called the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears was where we saw Indians moved to those reservations. A heartbreaking sight because they literally had to travel over some pretty nasty terrain, most by foot. Let me read an excerpt that I think is very interesting. In 1838, Cherokee people were forcibly moved from their homeland and relocated to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. They resisted their removal by creating their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, as a platform for their views. They sent their educated young men on speaking tours throughout the United States. They lobbied Congress and created a petition with more than 15,000 Cherokee signatures against removal. They took their case to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled that they were a sovereign nation in Worcester versus Virginia. 1832, President Andrew Johnson ignored the Supreme Court decision and forced his Indian Removal Act of 1830 and pushed through the Treaty of New Echota. In 1838, Cherokee people were forcibly taken from their homes, incarcerated in stockades, forced to walk more than 1,000 miles, and removed to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. More than 4,000 died, and many are buried in unmarked graves along the trail where they cried. So this was a very horrible, horrible experience. And it was all because of the fact there was this mentality that says, we won, you lost, we're putting you on reservations. And friends, it was a very difficult situation. And to this day, we have there are areas of America where there are still Indian tribes, and it's interesting because they're no longer called reservations; they're called tribal lands, which is a nice change. And like for example, with the pandemic that's happening right now, say for example in Michigan, parts of Michigan are tribal lands, and they're not subject to the state law. They're still subject to federal law, but they're not subject to state law. And in Michigan, the governor may pass so many different rules and regulations regarding life in terms of, for example, one thing was casinos. They tried to build casinos in Detroit, Michigan, but they wouldn't let it happen. But they started building casinos on Indian land because they let it happen. It's their own land. So it's interesting how now it's tribal land, and we don't call it reservations all these years later. But in the 1800s, not so fast. There was a lot of dislike, maybe even hatred, between the whites and the Indians, unfortunate as it was. So we'll talk about it more another time. Thank you very much.